The Gov, as we called Adlai too, took the role of family friend seriously, a privilege of maintaining long and lasting friends which he treasured. And among those friends, he treasured their kids as well. He said that they were learning tools for him, and what better tool to learn from than one of those, who was Adele Simmons. He enjoyed knowing, listening to them. And the friendships with Adele's parents, Herman Dunlap Smith, known as Dutch, and his wife Ellen were special. They and their family frequented this place, and he theirs. Dutch was chair of at least 10 philanthropies in Chicago, including long chair, in fact, maybe the creator of the Chicago Community Trust. Is that right?
It had been created before, but he
gave it that yeah. And the Newberry Library. Ellen, long volunteer at the Field Museum, manning its bird department alone by herself in World War II, when all the workers were, the regular curators were off at war. She founded the Field Museum's Women's Board, a source of volunteers and fundraising. And she wrote a book on Chicagoland birds with the environment in her heart, long before nature became today's cause. She was there first. So Adele has picked up their innovative minds and hearts and philanthropic passions, carrying them to the next step. As president of the MacArthur Foundation, as you all probably know, and former education president of Hampshire College, and happily for the Stevenson Center is a member of our advisory board. And just to give you a few highlights of her career, because, you know, we don't have all month to listen to the long details, I'll just mention a few of the things. In your program, it says that she was co-chair of the Council on Global Affairs Study, the Global Edge, and Agenda for Chicago's Future. And she established the Urban Sustainability Network that convenes 125 sustainability directors in Canada and the US. She was president of the Global Philanthropy Partnership and vice chair of Metropolis 2020, which George Ranney knows all about, leading their work on sustainability. As I say, it could go on and on and on, but certainly in this household, you have to mention that she was on the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Sustainable Development, the UN being so important in our family's hearts. So Adele drove today all the way from the dunes. She left at 10:30. She got here a little bit early, but I think it was a 3-hour, 4-hour drive to make this presentation. And it's with enormous pleasure and gratitude that I ask you to welcome philanthropist, educator, world traveler, family friend, Adele Simmons.
Thank you.
And thank you, Adele.
Before I start, I want to share a couple of memories. I have many memories of time here at this house, walking along the river, watching grown-ups play tennis, and much more. In 1952, Stevenson spent the Monday night before the election at our house. I, of course, went to bed that night confident that I would be spending the night in the White House in 3 months. And Tuesday morning, it was my job to go out to the front door and tell the press that the governor would be coming out shortly, which I did. I went to the polls with him, which was my first experience with polls, and have voted properly ever since I was old enough, I think. In 1956, I was just starting at Garrison Forest School outside of Baltimore. There were only 2 of us in the entire school for the Gov, the president of the student government and me. I wrote the Gov about this, and shortly afterwards received a button, which I still have today, that says, "Adlai likes me." The Gov encouraged and nurtured my interests in global issues during my formative years and urged me to engage beyond the United States. The summer of 1961, I went to Kenya with Crossroads Africa and a group of US students. We joined Kenyan students building thatching roofs and finishing off a YMCA camp. Maasai warriors surrounded us and watched us work. I traded a shirt of mine with a Maasai warrior for his spear. When I came home, I landed in New York and went right to the Waldorf to spend the night at the UN ambassador's apartment. I was not allowed to bring my spear up to the apartment, so I checked it and picked it up on my way out. But more important, that night, the Gov asked me endless questions about what was happening in Kenya and East Africa. Kenyatta had been released from detention when we were there, and he wanted to know what it would mean for Kenya. But I am here today to talk about climate change, which, if the Gov were here, let me get rid of my glasses, if the Gov were here, would be very much on his mind. Indeed, I think he would be alarmed by where we find ourselves today. I won't even comment on what he would be thinking about the view of the current administration on this issue and many others. And I want to thank the Union of Concerned Scientists, on whose board I serve, for providing many of the slides that I will be showing you today. My focus on climate change is why we must act now if we care about our children. Not only we must act now, but we must demand that our government act now. In summary, it's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, but we can fix it. To begin with a little data, it's warming. 18 of the 19 warmest years since record keeping began have occurred since 2001. That means kids graduating from high school have only known a world of record-breaking temperatures. The 5 warmest years on record were the last 5 years. The National Climate Assessment is produced every 4 years by congressional mandate. According to the most recent assessment, NCA4, which came out in November 18, we know with increasing certainty that climate change is happening now. Furthermore, the NCA4 emphasizes that most of the warming of the past 50 years is directly attributable to human activities. Also last fall, at the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, the body tasked since 1988 with providing the science to inform policymakers, released its special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's important to note that the IPCC warned in clear terms how severe the impacts would be if we even managed to limit global temperature rise by an additional 0.5 degrees centigrade. There are many visible effects of a 1 degree Celsius increase today, from dying coral reefs to declining Arctic sea ice. But given what we've just experienced with Hurricane Dorian, let's look at extreme weather. Scientists have advanced our understanding of how climate change is impacting the behavior and severity of extreme weather events. In simple terms, the warmer atmosphere means we're living with warmer air, and warmer air holds more moisture. Simultaneously, warmer oceans can increase hurricane power, and related to this, rising seas means storm surge can do much more damage. So what is the world doing to mitigate climate change impact? The nations of the world agreed in Paris in 2015 to try to hold global temperature increases to well below 2 degrees centigrade and pursue increases closer to 1.5 degrees. We're already at 1 degree, so we need to act swiftly. Just last month, the UN hosted a climate action summit. You'll see the Secretary General's emphasis on action. Many countries use the summit to demonstrate next steps on how by 2020 they will update their nationally determined contributions, NDCs, with the aim to collectively reduce emissions by at least 45% by 2030 and prepare the national strategies to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera announced the Climate Ambition Alliance, which Chile hopes to build to bring together nations upscaling action by 2020, as well as those working towards achieving net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. 59 nations have signaled their intention to submit an enhanced climate action plan, and an additional 11 nations have started an internal process to boost ambition and have this reflected in their national plans. In terms of the 2050 group, 65 countries and the European Union are joined by 10 regions, 102 cities, 93 businesses, and 12 investors, all committed to net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. The UN Global Compact demonstrated that business is moving as companies with a combined market capitalization of more than 2.3 trillion US dollars and annual direct emissions equivalent to 73 coal-fired power plants pledged to take action to align their businesses with science-based targets. Getting out of coal is a priority. The Powering Past Coal Alliance expanded to include 30 countries, 22 states or regions, and 31 corporations committed to stopping the building of new coal power plants by 2020. Money talks. The Asset Owner Alliance, a group of the world's largest pension funds and insurers responsible for directing more than US $2 trillion in investments, is committed to transitioning to carbon-neutral investment portfolios by 2050. The members of the alliance will immediately start to engage with companies in which they are investing to ensure that they decarbonize their business models. The International Development Finance Club, IDFC, a leading group of 24 national and regional development banks from all over the world, with a majority active in emerging and developing countries, is to announce for the first time a quantitative target of mobilizing $1 trillion US dollars by 2025, with at least 100 million for adaptation. In addition, the IDFC will launch a partnership with the Green Climate Fund to promote direct access to international climate finance and a new US $10 million fund. Climate Facility to increase support of its members, and they're working to increase the support of their members, particularly on climate finance. Carbon cutbacks can't happen without reliable, renewable energy options. We've made great strides with both wind and solar technologies. In the US alone, we almost have 10 times as much wind power capacity as we had in 2006, which is enough to meet the equivalent of the energy needs of 30 million US households. In some parts of the country, wind is the lowest cost electricity option. In the response to the critics of wind turbines, that blades harm birds, that blades make annoying whirring sounds, or, just a minute, in Trump's case, I knew that was it, I didn't want the page. He has said, and I quote Trump, "The blades can give you cancer." Anyway, to make him happy, we now have new bladeless wind turbines that have been manufactured and will they look sort of like an asparagus stalk and they wobble in the wind, but they will be more and more in place. Solar power is also growing. Hampshire College was one of the first places in the country to have solar panels. They were very expensive, they weren't terrific, but you had to start somewhere, and people learned a lot from our experience in upgrading and improving the quality of solar panels. US solar generation has expanded 24% from 2017 to 2018 in 1 year alone. And earlier this year, we reached our 2 millionth rooftop photovoltaic system in this country. Just think, 2 million rooftops. We now have enough to meet the equivalent of 12 million household electricity demand. Large-scale solar paired with energy storage is now competitive with all other options in some areas of the US. So that's the good news. Of course, this could be happening even more quickly with appropriate interventions at the federal level. not something we're likely to see in the short term. The Japanese have developed a way of floating solar panels on top of water. Clean energy companies are turning lakes, wetlands, ponds, and canals as building grounds for solar panels. The largest floating plant will be on top of a reservoir of Japan's Yamakura Dam. In short, without supportive action from the federal government in this country, cities in the US and elsewhere, because the federal government isn't there, so cities are leading the way to address climate policy changes. US cities have stepped up and are committed on an international level to climate change with an attempt to reassure the world that the US wasn't abandoning the climate fight, even though Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. We need to focus on cities. Big cities consume 78% of the world's energy and produce more than 60% of the world's greenhouse gases, according to a UN report. Sustainability officers at cities around the globe are learning through each other through a variety of networks. The Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, C40, and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, a group of the sustainability officers from 124 cities in the US and Canada, a group that I started and that now meets regularly. And most importantly, what they do is they share what each one of them is doing. Philadelphia may be doing something interesting, Los Angeles is doing another thing, and they all learn from each other. This is not a place where they're competing, it's a place where they're sharing and really, really making improvements as a result of meeting together. So this leads to the question, what is Chicago doing? Chicago was an early leader in climate action planning. We produced one of the first city climate action plans under Mayor Daley and set up a green ribbon committee to manage its implementation. Chicago has focused on the primary source of emissions for the region, buildings. Chicago, in cooperation with utilities and real estate owners and developers, actively promotes the retrofit of existing buildings and has addressed building code issues to ensure that new construction is designed with sustainability in mind. Chicago has successfully targeted impact on sectors that were low-hanging fruit, which included hospitals, universities, and large commercial buildings. These sectors have their own convenings to connect the dots on sustainability planning, financing these initiatives, and getting senior approval. In some areas, it's easier than others. Certainly at universities, you can count on students to occupy the president's office if he doesn't do the right thing, so that's very helpful. We don't quite have the same momentum behind hospitals, but the corporations are quite amazing. They meet together, they share ideas, and you can see Abbott and Baxter are implementing each other's ideas. They're not competing in this space. But transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas pollution. It remains to be seen how Mayor Lightfoot will tackle these issues, but her transition team called for steps including bringing back the Department of Environment, committing to 100% renewable energy by 2025, focusing on environmental justice and safety, and creating accountability in recycling. The WBEZ website has an impressive list of the 10 things Mayor Lightfoot can do to combat climate change. So what's the message for our children, or in my case, our grandchildren? If you've been watching climate issues, you've realized that a new powerful wave of activism and movement has been swelling up over the last couple of years, much of it led by children and young adults. This is an issue of passion for those engaged in convincing policymakers to make paradigm shifts in sustainability planning. Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts said, "We need their leadership. Young people are the army. You put a spotlight in this issue in the way that has never been done before." As all of you know, one inspiring young leader is Greta Thunberg of Sweden. She founded the Youth Strike for Climate movement. And you can get it under hashtags Friday for Future. Stop going to school on Fridays to protest and raise awareness of global warming. She has gone to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos. She has talked to the US Senate Climate Change Task Force, where she said, quote, "Please save your praise. We don't want it. We want you to unite behind science. I know you're trying, but not hard enough." She gets results. After speaking to the EU Commission committed to spending a quarter of the EU budget on climate mitigation over 7 years. The British Parliament, after speaking with Greta, voted to declare a climate emergency and promised to zero out its carbon emissions by 2050. And just a few days ago, on September 20th, she led a global climate strike across thousands of cities and towns worldwide with millions of participants calling for action. She's even been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. As the Norwegian who nominated her said, "We have proposed Greta because if we do nothing to halt climate change, it will be the cause of wars, conflict, and refugees." Greta Thunberg has launched a mass movement, which I see as a major contribution to peace. So, while policymakers are kind of spinning their wheels, particularly in Washington, many groups have come up with engaging approaches to problem solve. One is 0 Hour. Frustrated by climate inaction of elected officials and the lack of youth voices, this strives to educate communities around the country and abroad about the root causes of climate change. Another is the Sunrise Movement, an army of young people making climate change an urgent priority across America by electing leaders who stand up for the health and well-being of all. Sunrise supports the Green New Deal as a path to address climate change and create jobs. Litter of Light, started in the Philippines, is a global movement to repurpose plastic soda bottles to create sustainable solar light sources for home, businesses, and in the street. In Mexico, Tere Gonzalez works directly with minorities, marginalized groups, gypsies, and indigenous communities, migrants, slums, and victims of drug cartels. And another organization, Bright Green Renewable Energy, founded by Shesbet Lezen in Kenya. Bright Green is a social enterprise group that uses recycled organic waste to create environmentally safe briquettes for cooking and heating. And impacting better health comes as a result, saving trees that would otherwise be cut down and creating jobs. There are other examples too. I could go on. But in conclusion, we need to join with the youth and to continue, I think I forgot that. Okay, let's just go through. Is that it? Okay. We need to join with the youth and continue to press our leadership at all levels for action and address climate change. Let's leave more hope for our children and their children. Let me just run through these. That's it, I guess. Okay. So anyway, we got to do something. We've got to act.